Welcome to this AQA GCSE Geography warm-up video. It is the fourth in a series of videos designed to guide you through last-minute preparations for your GCSE exams. In this video, we will look at Paper 2, Unit A, Urban Issues and Challenges, through a variety of practice questions and retrieval activities. This paper assesses your human geography topics, urban issues and challenges, which is covered in this video, along with the changing economic world and resource management, which will be covered in future videos in this series. Remember that resource management has some optionality and is divided into questions 3, 4, 5 and 6. Question 3 is about UK resources and everyone answers this question. Then you need to pick a question from question 4 on food, question 5 on water and question 6 on energy. You will have just done one of these as a global focus in school, so make sure you pick the right one. In Unit 2A, you look at a variety of issues and challenges that affect urban environments. You will have covered what urbanisation is and the impacts of this process, focusing on an LIC or NEE city. Most centres opt for Rio, Lagos or Mumbai, looking at the social, economic and environmental opportunities and challenges, along with the growth of informal settlements and how this can be managed. You will have then studied a UK city in detail, looking at how it has changed over time, for example in terms of population or in terms of regeneration, before finishing this unit looking at sustainable urban development. You will have completed a case study of a sustainable urban environment and should have an understanding of sustainable transport strategies too. Unit 2A includes an in-depth study of a major city in an LIC or NEE. So you need to know the location and importance of the city regionally, nationally and internationally, as well as how it has grown in terms of natural increase and migration. You will have learnt that urban growth has created opportunities such as access to healthcare and education and access to resources such as water supply and energy. However, you need to be able to contrast this with the challenges such as managing urban growth in terms of informal settlements, providing clean water, sanitation systems and energy, and providing access to services such as health and education. Remember, these are not available for all. You also have the challenges of reducing unemployment and reducing crime, as well as managing environmental issues such as waste disposal, air and water pollution, and traffic congestion. Finally, you need to know an example of how urban planning is improving the quality of life for the urban poor. Okay, let's try out some missing vowels to test your recall of some of the key terms linked to urban issues and challenges. We have 5 for you to try, so good luck. This is our first one, so we'll give you a couple of moments to try and work it out. Maybe a tricky one to start with. Remember, all the vowels have been removed. Okay, let's have a look at what it is. It is urbanisation. So this is defined as an increasing proportion of a country's population living in urban areas. Urbanisation is linked to industrialisation, and it took place in HICs in the 18th century following the Industrial Revolution, which saw people flocking into cities to work in factories, seen as a more reliable income than farming, and the opportunity to earn money and improve living conditions. NEEs and LICs have urbanised much more recently, and it's only in recent years that the urban population has overtaken the rural one. We currently have around 57% of the global population living in towns and cities across the world. Okay, here's our next one. So again, we'll give you a couple of moments to try and work it out. Have you spotted it? It is megacity. So these are cities with over 10 million inhabitants. In the 1980s, the top 10 megacities were fairly equally split between rich and poor countries, with Tokyo, Osaka and New York occupying the top 3 spots in terms of population. Now megacities are mainly found in NEEs where urban population growth has been rapid, and around 80% of them are in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, such as China, India and Bangladesh. We're also starting to see megacities emerge in Africa, for example Lagos and Cairo. Okay, here's our next one. Okay, hopefully quite an easy one. Let's have a look. It is migration, which simply means the movement of people and is a factor that causes urbanisation, both in HICs where people move overseas to work in global cities such as London and New York, and in NEEs and LICs where rural to urban migration is more important, people leaving rural areas in LICs where life is difficult to find opportunities in cities within their country. And we'll come back to this in a few moments. Okay, here's our next one. So a slightly more tricky one. This is linked to urbanisation. Okay, have we spotted this reason for urbanisation? Let's have a look. It is natural increase. It's the other reason that cities are growing in terms of population. So as healthcare improves across NEEs and LICs, it means that the death rate goes down and the life expectancy goes up. If the death rate is lower than the birth rate, then the population will naturally increase in size. Okay, and our final term is this one. Hopefully you've spotted it already. It is squatter settlement. So these often arise as a result of migration. They are low quality housing for the urban poor, usually on the periphery of a city, and often with the residents not having the legal right to the land, hence the term squatter settlement. However, the term squatter settlement is problematic though, as in recent years, schemes to improve the quality of life in these settlements have given residents the right to own or rent their homes in many cities. So we tend to use informal settlements now. However, you will still see it as squatter settlement in the exam paper. Okay, let's think a little bit more about why rural to urban migration happens. Hopefully you will remember what push and pull factors are. Push factors are negative things that make people want to leave an area. So for example, they push them away, such as conflict. And pull factors are things that attract people to an area. Again, they pull them in, such as properly constructed housing. You've got 1 minute to sort the 8 boxes on the screen into push and pull factors. So you need to get yourself a pen and a piece of paper. 1 minute, good luck. Okay, let's see how well you did. So our push factors are farming is hard and poorly paid, there are few doctors or hospitals, poor harvest may lead to malnutrition or famine, and isolated due to poor roads. And in terms of our pull factors, we have there are more well-paid jobs, public transport is better, range of entertainments available, and there are better medical facilities. So well done if you managed to get all of those right. Remember that if you were asked about push and pull factors in an exam question, you should try to give examples, such as there are better medical facilities, including modern hospitals, community clinics, and even dental surgeries, rather than just saying there are better medical facilities. So we're now going to think about the informal settlements in LICs and NEEs. Often exam questions ask you to discuss the challenges found in these settlements, or you're asked to focus on how quality of life can be improved. Remember, you should have studied a specific example of an informal settlement, so you should be able to recall some specific facts from that case study. Let's have a look at this 3, 2, 1 activity. So you have 2 minutes to answer these questions. We need 3 challenges of living in a squatter settlement, 2 ways that quality of life could be improved in squatter settlements, and 1 positive characteristic of squatter settlements. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see how you got on. Did you manage to come up with 3 challenges to begin with? Let's have a look at what you could have said. Firstly, homes are poorly constructed. They are often built illegally with basic materials, which means that they could provide inadequate shelter, particularly in a city like Mumbai that experiences a monsoon every year. Homes are also usually very close together, which means that fires can spread rapidly as well as diseases. Secondly, homes are often built on steep slopes on the edge of a city. For example, in Rio, this means that they tend to be piled high up on top of each other, but they're also at severe risk of landslides in heavy rain, and it can also make them difficult to access. So if you've studied Rio, you will know that cable cars have been installed. And lastly, on the screen, we've got the lack of access to sanitation and proper waste disposal, meaning that there is a high risk of disease from contaminated water in informal settlements. Of course, there are other challenges. Access to proper toilets is limited, as is access to safe drinking water and a reliable electricity supply. Again, if you have studied Rio, you will remember the images of the dangerously overloaded electricity poles where hundreds of homes tap into the energy supply illegally. You also have the issue of crime in some informal settlements. So how do we get on with the ways that quality of life could be improved? Well, firstly, we have access to microcredit schemes, which are small loans without interest payments or minimal interest payments that enable people to either set up small businesses that can create a sustainable income for them, or to make improvements to their homes to improve the quality of life for their families. We also have access to water supply and sanitation for the reasons that we outlined a moment ago. And you should know an example of a scheme or project that has improved the quality of life for people living in poor quality housing as part of your LIC or NEE case study. For example, if you study Rio, you've probably looked at the Favela Barrio project, and you need to be able to give specific details about how your scheme has improved the quality of life, as well as being able to evaluate its success. So we asked you for a positive characteristic of squatter settlements. We tend to focus really heavily on the challenges of these urban areas, and we overlook the good things quite frequently. And one good thing is that they do have a really strong sense of community where people are working together to improve the quality of life for themselves and their neighbours. And more established parts of informal settlements can actually be really vibrant. They do have other positive features. For example, recycling rates tend to be very high, particularly in Davri and Mumbai, a brilliant example where about 80% of waste is recycled. Right, let's move on. So we're going to attempt a 6 marker now, and this is our question. Explain why housing is a challenge in an LIC or an NEE city that you have studied. And I've asked you to think about construction, services, health, education, or unemployment, but choose just 2 of those to focus on. So remember, if it's a 6 marker, we're looking for 2 developed paragraphs. If you want to attempt the question before I talk you through a model answer, pause the video now, give yourself between 6 and 10 minutes to have a go at this question. When you are happy with your question, then press play and we'll talk you through a model answer. Okay, so we have a model answer on the screen. So let's read through and see why this is a model answer. Rio in Brazil is home to around 800 favelas and houses over 1/5 of the city's population. Housing is a challenge in Rio for a number of reasons. Firstly, many of the homes were initially poorly built, made out of whatever recycled materials were available, and constructed illegally. It also meant that they were not built to withstand extreme weather, and the fact they were built on steep slopes meant the risk of landslide is high. For example, in 2010, more than 13,000 people were made homeless and over 200 people died when their homes were swept away in a landslide. Informal settlements are not planned, meaning that homes are often cramped together without access to a safe and reliable water supply or electricity supply. People tap illegally into electricity pylons, which is unsafe and increases the risk of fire, which spreads rapidly through overcrowded neighbourhoods. Without proper sewerage, waste drains into water sources, increasing the risk of catching waterborne diseases. So let's think about why this would achieve all 6 marks. Well, 6 markers need 2 well-developed paragraphs. We've written initially about the quality of construction and the land they're built on, and we've used connectives to develop the points into chains of reasoning, such as it also meant, and has been backed up with some specific figures for Rio. We've then talked about services and the impact that a lack of access to these causes. As this is an explain question, there is no need for a conclusion. It's also worth noting that this question tests AO1 and AO2 with knowledge and understanding. Once you've studied an LIC or NEE city in detail, you need to do the same for a major UK city. So you need to know the location and importance of the city, as well as how it has grown in terms of migration and how this has affected the character of the city. You need to understand the many challenges that that city has to face, such as urban deprivation, inequalities in housing, pollution, waste, education, health and employment, along with a solution to these, such as the importance of urban greening, better transport schemes and making use of brownfield sites. You also need to know an example of an urban regeneration project to show the reasons why the area needed regeneration in the first place, the main features of the project, and how successful it has been. So we're going to move on to a bit more exam practice, and this time we're looking at 4 markers. So we're going to explain how the character of a UK city has been affected by migration. And at the bottom of the screen, I've asked you to think about religious buildings, cafes and restaurants, and cultural events. Once again, if you want to attempt the question before I talk you through a model answer, then pause the video now, give yourself a few minutes, and when you're ready, press play. Okay, so let's have a look. Our question was, explain how the character of a UK city has been affected by migration. And I've chosen here to write about London. London is one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the world. Migration has had a big impact on the characteristics of the city, particularly in the East End. Brick Lane in Shoreditch is home to a large Bangladeshi community. This is reflected by the number of curry houses along the street, as well as the street art which showcases things important to Bangladeshi culture. In Whitechapel, the East London Mosque is a focal point for the Muslim community and can accommodate 10,000 worshippers, which reflects the fact that in this area around 50% of the population are Muslim. So it does achieve 4 marks. It achieves those 4 marks quite easily. So remember, 4 markers need 2 well elaborated points. So in the answer, we've got good detail about cultural diversity in terms of food and art. And then we've got another point about accommodating religion. And obviously these are both linked to the fact that migration has meant that there is a much more diverse community in this area than there would have been in the past. We've already mentioned that one of the biggest challenges in city is a lack of green space. For those of you that have studied London as your city study, hopefully you will be aware that almost half of London is green space, but this is not the case for most cities across the country. We need to think about why urban greening is so important. You've got 30 seconds to come up with 3 reasons. So again, get your pens ready, off we go. Okay, you've had your 30 seconds. Let's see how we got on. So hopefully you have managed to come up with 3 benefits. So firstly, by planting more trees and plants, we're increasing the amount of pollutants that can be absorbed, particularly CO2, but also gases like carbon monoxide, which are emitted by car exhaust. Traffic congestion in cities leads to air pollution, which in turn causes respiratory illnesses. So urban greening can filter out some of those harmful pollutants. It also decreases the risk of flooding. Leaves reduce the amount of water reaching the ground by interception, and roots soak up some of the water that does reach the ground, so there is less surface runoff. And by having more land as green space, it means there are less surfaces covered in concrete, which is impermeable and it stops infiltration, which again increases the risk of flooding. Finally, the effects on physical and mental health are really important. In many cities, people live in flats, so they don't have their own outside space, so having somewhere where they can exercise is essential to their well-being. Okay, an important part of cities in the UK is the role that brownfield sites play in urban regeneration. So we're going to have another go at a 6 marker. This time our question is, the benefits of using brownfield sites in urban regeneration outweighs the costs. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Well, let's just very quickly remind ourselves what we mean by a brownfield site. A brownfield site is a site that has been previously used in the past and has been left. Often they're quite derelict and in a bit of a poor state of repair. They are often a bit of an eyesore in cities, so they are really important to use in terms of urban regeneration. So we're going to gather some ideas using the on balance activity that we've seen in some of the other warm-up videos. So in this part of the paper, you often get asked about urban regeneration projects that you've studied, and using brownfield sites is a really important part of urban redevelopment. Remember, I've just said that these are sites that have been previously used, they've been left to become derelict, as opposed to greenfield sites, which are sites that have never been developed on before. Remember, you're going to be looking at greenfield sites in your pre-release this year. So these abandoned areas are a huge problem in cities. They often attract antisocial behaviour and they can deter investment, and redevelopment is generally seen as a positive thing. However, there are lots of issues around their development. So what we would like you to do is to pause the video for a few moments and try to come up with 2 advantages of using these sites and 2 disadvantages. Okay, so if you can pause the video now and restart when you have noted those pros and cons down. Okay, let's have a look at your first suggestions. So firstly, using brownfield sites mean that areas that have become run down and an eyesore get redeveloped, which dramatically improves the local area. And secondly, using brownfield sites reduces urban sprawl, which is where the town or city grows to such an extent that it starts to take over the surrounding countryside. So that's really important. We've also got some other advantages such as, so you've also got utilities and infrastructure in place, which saves money during the redevelopment. And if the land is being converted into housing, this addresses the national housing crisis. So we now need to think about those 2 disadvantages. There are lots of drawbacks of brownfield sites. How many can you think of? If the old site was used for heavy industry, it may be contaminated. This is really expensive and difficult to clean up. And even without contamination, there will be old buildings that need demolishing. So this can be really expensive for developers. Although, again, people living in the local area would see this as a benefit because that contaminated site, which is an eyesore to them, is being improved. Additionally, these sites have often been derelict and undisturbed for many years, so they've often become really important wildlife habitats, which will then need to be destroyed to make way for redevelopment. So remember, when you're being asked to evaluate using brownfield or even greenfield sites, you need to be able to present both sites backed up with examples. And if you can present some evidence of issues with a regeneration project that you've studied, then even better. You can also compare brownfield sites to greenfield sites in your answer. So, for example, you can talk about how local people are much more likely to oppose the development of greenfield sites over brownfield sites. So let's move back to that 6 marker question. The benefits of using brownfield sites in urban regeneration outweigh the costs. To what extent do you agree with this statement? I'm about to show you a model answer to this question. If you would like to attempt the question yourself, give yourself between 6 and 10 minutes to have a go at the question. When you are ready, press play and we'll go through that model answer and you can compare your own. So here is our model answer. Let's have a look at this answer in a bit more detail. Brownfield sites are those that have been previously used and have been left to become derelict. These derelict sites are a problem in urban areas. They are a huge waste of valuable land and an eyesore which may put off investment into the area, as well as encouraging crime and antisocial behaviour. By turning brownfield sites into something useful, such as housing or retail, urban areas are being improved, and issues such as the housing crisis are being addressed without having to develop greenfield sites in rural areas. However, there are some issues surrounding brownfield sites. They often require a lengthy and expensive clean-up before they can be reused if they were used for industry in the past. However, that does not mean environmental damage is taken care of. Additionally, because they are left alone, important wildlife habitats sometimes develop in them, which may concern conservationists. However, the damage to habitats would be greater if greenfield sites were chosen instead. Despite these issues, I strongly agree that the benefits of brownfield site development outweighs the costs, most importantly as they are taking an area that has been left to rot and turning it into something useful with social, economic and environmental benefits. So why does it get all 6 marks? Well, firstly, the first paragraph reminds us of what a brownfield site is and the potential that they have, and it makes a good comparison to greenfield sites. The second paragraph offers some counter-arguments in terms of some of the costs, but then gives a response to them. The reason I've done this is because I've said I strongly agree, so when I present a counter-argument, I want to be able to almost dismiss it. To make the answer even better, you could use specific examples of brownfield site developments that you have studied. So the last part of Unit 2A is all about sustainable urban development. You need to know what this is and how it involves social, economic and environmental planning, i.e. it's not just about reducing pollution and CO2 emissions, but it's also about improving access to services and making houses more affordable, as well as many other things. You will have studied an example of a sustainable urban environment. You might have looked at East Village in London, or you might have looked at something on a bigger scale, such as the city of Freiburg in Germany. And finally, you need to know how traffic congestion can be reduced and why this is important in terms of the environment and people's health, with an example of a sustainable urban traffic scheme you have studied. So we're going to finish off by thinking about sustainable environments with this 6 marker about transport schemes. Our last 6 marker is evaluate the strategies used to reduce traffic congestion in a named city, thinking about examples of schemes, how they discourage car use and their knock-on benefits. And like we've done for the others, if you want to pause the video and attempt this one, please do. Give yourself between 6 and 10 minutes. When you're ready, press play and we will have a look at a model answer for you. So let's just read through this answer together. We're focusing on Freiburg. Lots of you will have studied this as it's one of the examples in the textbooks. Freiburg is a city in Germany that has an integrated traffic plan to reduce congestion. It is important to reduce congestion because congestion leads to air pollution and associated health risks, as well as increasing journey times, fuel consumption, and the risk of accidents. The biggest part of Freiburg's transport plan is the tram system. The network covers 30 kilometres and is connected to the bus network system, making journey transfers quick and easy, particularly as the trams run every 8 minutes. Over 2/3 of the population live within half a kilometre of a tram stop, making public transport very accessible, and tram tickets are very cheap and offer unlimited travel within the city. In addition to the tram system, there is a network of 400 kilometres of cycle paths and 9,000 parking spaces for bikes, while severe restrictions on car parking operate throughout the city. For example, in one district, each parking space costs £20,000 per year, therefore encouraging people to cycle instead of drive. These schemes have had great success in the city. Public transport and cycle usage has almost doubled in the last 40 years, while car journeys have decreased by 10%. So why does it get all 6 marks? Well, I have briefly introduced the city and I've said why it's important to reduce congestion. And my next paragraph focuses on the tram system. There is some specific detail here and I focus on the key features and the benefits of these. In the next paragraph, I bring in additional strategies that encourage bike use and discourage car use, before concluding at the end by giving evidence of success. Through the answer, I have backed up my points with facts and figures specific to Freiburg. So we've revised urbanisation in LICs and NEEs, reminded ourselves about our HIC city study, and we've evaluated some urban sustainability strategies. Hopefully this video will help you go into your paper 2 exam feeling more confident, particularly with those longer answer questions. Wishing you heaps of luck, and hopefully you will be back to watch the next video looking at the changing economic world.